Competition for Steam. What the hell does that mean for us? Because if you think about it, that's a pretty big thing. If I'm totally honest, it's not something I would have really expected to happen, in fact. But it's not just there's another launcher and that's irritating. That's the viewpoint of a lot of people that I certainly understand. I don't like having a bunch of launchers, but there's a lot more to it. So what's the deal? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, let's talk about the fact that the Epic Store wants to fight Steam. So let's just talk about the elephant in the room really quick. When I heard this, my immediate reaction was, ugh, another launcher? Because let's be frank here, it's super annoying you have to launch Fortnite from a different launcher, and now it's going to be a bunch of games, because they're going to want the deal here. We'll talk about that in a minute. But as a consumer of video games, it's very easy to focus on this aspect of it because it's the thing that's most obviously affecting us. However, as I teased so deftly in the intro, there is so much more at play. So why are we talking about Epic Games launcher/store when there's others on the market? For instance, Uplay, Ubisoft's Ubisoft store thing that has its own games and sucks a lot. Well, the short answer is, in describing it, I've already told you exactly why we haven't talked about it. It kind of just sucks a lot. You're kind of just stuck using it. It's also not a major market force, as it primarily concerns Ubisoft games. The Epic Store isn't going to work like that at all. The first big point I want to say is that Epic owns like pretty much the biggest game engine. When we talked about the problems with Fallout 76 in a recent video, one of my suggestions was Bethesda really needs to just move over to Unreal or one of their own engines, and the fact that the choices I suggested were between Unreal and stuff that they already owned should be telling to you. Unreal has such a massive presence in the gaming world, and so many companies turn to it to create games on account it's such a thoroughly useful platform. Being it's a technology that a company has to license, they have one massive advantage in removing that hurdle entirely if you distribute with them by providing an Unreal Engine 4 license as part of the deal for publishing your game in the Epic Store. But perhaps more valuable are things that probably aren't included in the contract. For instance, I'd be willing to bet Epic would probably jump to help a developer that is publishing their game in the Epic Games Store, which will result in a much larger amount of money for Epic, being they keep a percentage of that game's sales, being they are the retail platform the sales are going through, over people who simply license the engine to use it on what are now regarded as entirely competitive platforms. You license Unreal to make a game on Steam, it's more kind of like asking permission to use Epic's engine rather than opting into a big Epic ecosystem. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to this. For one, I don't love the idea of Epic having power over what engine people use from the retail end of things, as much as it does the ease of use and systemic background development incentives to use Unreal Engine anyhow. But me not liking that doesn't change the situation that is essentially a concern I think a lot of people might end up having to deal with in the future, so to speak. Now, getting a free Unreal Engine 4 license isn't the only advantage you have with selling your game at Epic Store rather than Steam. It's also how much revenue you get from sales. The revenue split on Steam has traditionally been 70-30, with Valve taking 30% of the money made from the sale. Now, Epic clearly wants to be quite aggressive in this respect, changing the revenue split to 88% going to the developer or publisher and 12% going to Epic. This is obviously favorable for developers and publishers, as that's a big difference. That's nearly 20% difference in revenue split. A lot of developers probably will see this and think that that's enough to mitigate the kind of power the Epic Store kind of gives to the Unreal Engine. And truthfully, I do actually think that's to some degree a valid take on the monetary elements of this. Obviously, people making games want more money for making games because either A, they need to live and money allows them to, or B, they're a large company with shareholders that demand their profits continually rise. For a AAA game studio that already uses Unreal Engine 4 to make games, the Epic Store just became the no-brainer store. And while it may be annoying to some degree that there is now a second launcher, the idea that a AAA developer could get more money might end up allowing them to spend more on development. Actually, that's a joke. They probably won't do that. But still, on paper, it makes sense. But on paper, AAA developers probably should be able to make enough money not to do a lot of the stuff that they do. So, nah. But let's talk about indie developers for a moment. Pretty much any and all money that comes in is useful to an indie developer. Whether it's your first game and you're trying to figure out how to live on the kind of money you make from making games, or you're an indie developer with some degree of a following who knows that they could maybe spend a little bit more on the meager marketing campaigns that an indie developer can usually engage in. In either scenario, Epic Games yields a situation that is just inherently better for them. Now, clearly, Steam saw something coming because they changed their revenue agreement a little bit depending on how much money comes in. For instance, if you make $10 million off of a game, they change it so that you get 5% more of the revenue, and if you make 50 million, another 5%, bringing it down to an 80-20 split, which is definitely a lot more favorable, but also not something that indie game developers will ever be able to take advantage of, and they're also probably the people who genuinely benefit from a better revenue split situation the most. So if you see an indie dev saying they like the Epic Store more, maybe don't bring it up with them. Like, if you want their games to exist, if you want them to have incentive to continue working, that's the kind of thing that does matter to them a lot. Something I've seen raised in contention, the idea that the better revenue split might lead to better pricing on the Epic Store than on Steam. Maybe. Now I say maybe because the world works a certain way that doesn't really prioritize that idea at all. In fact, I wouldn't expect it in the least. But hey, who knows? Again, for the most part, an indie developer needs the money, and a AAA developer has shareholders demanding the money, so it's not like the switch to digital distribution from physical has really changed the price, despite the fact that it totally removed manufacturing costs from distribution costs. We may start to see some of the actual material conditions surrounding these things change a little, but probably not the price. One thing that is definitely going away if you're moving to Epic is the ideas like forums and other social media oriented platforms, I guess, inside the Steam ecosystem. That stuff's just not going to be on the Epic Store, and according to Epic, it's because not a single developer they spoke to wanted forums. They much preferred to interact with communities on their own terms on other platforms like Reddit or Discord, where they had a little bit more control over moderation. And you know, I get that. Also, apparently their intent is to start a ticketing system to be able to have developers and publishers addressing concerns more directly rather than having to issue press releases and try to manage public opinion instead of actually doing work on the games. Now, again, that's speaking in ideal terms. I don't know that that's going to actually be the case. We'll see. Speaking of the public opinion aspect of things, that one guy who has for years owned and operated Steam Spy, you know, the statistics engine that is basically trying to figure out what's going on with Steam at any given time, has apparently worked with Epic Games for years, which is actually hilarious when you consider what Steam Spy is. It's pretty much like, hey, so here's everything we can possibly know about Steam, and we're making a competitor. He claims he didn't intend for it to work out to actually be a spy on Steam in that respect, but he's actually the person behind such ideas as a ticketing system rather than a forum. Now, one of the really big aspects of this whole thing is that Epic Games is owned by a massive mega corporation called Tencent, and that obviously gives them a lot of power in regards to Steam, despite the fact that Steam is, in its own respect, a mega corporation as well. It operates pretty much everywhere. It actually can provide advantages for people in third world countries who are buying games because their regional pricing can tend to make games much more available in those countries than they otherwise would be, say for instance if they had to buy a game at a US or a European Union price. And I'm sure that there will be effects and ramifications attached to the fact that this absolutely huge company is definitely gunning for control in the mainstream video game market. What that means, I can't tell you at this point, but it will be something to look out for. And finally, what could Valve do to compete with a game store that may actually attract developers away? I don't know, maybe make some of those good-ass Valve games that, you know, aren't just glorified tech demos. In fact, the ones that, you know, everybody likes or successors to them, either spiritual or direct. You could start making games again, Valve, is all I'm saying. That might remind people why they like Valve so much, because, I mean, I buy stuff from Walmart because it's cheap and I don't like Walmart, but I do like video games, so maybe make some of those if you want a positive perception within the gaming world. Maybe. Overall, there's a lot of aspects to this, and it may end up being a good thing. It could end up being a bad thing. It's a little early, but it is cool to know that if you do end up using the Epic Games Store, they will be giving away a free game every 2 weeks for the entirety of 2019. That's an idea I like a lot. I'll be taking advantage of it too. What are your thoughts on this subject? Leave us a comment, let us know what you're thinking, and if you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed now would be a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them is, of course, clicking the subscribe button and not forgetting to click the notification bell just to make sure you don't miss any of them. As always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time, right here on gameranx.